Hello everybody, my name is Benjamin Bloom. Good morning. Welcome back along for today's update. This is a story that actually broke last night, but I was in the middle of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is a very long Quentin Tarantino movie, and I had to just stick with it to get through. So we're going to talk about David Ornstein's breaking news on The Athletic last night in relation to the Premier League doctors' email that went back to the Premier League. They'd all been asked anonymously by the group, which is called the Premier League Doctors Group, for their feedback, and that was going to be kind of put together and sent off to the Premier League. And David Ornstein has seen this email, a very well connected journalist. We've had so many commentators during this crisis saying, I'm not a doctor, but, well, we're going to hear from the doctors now, so they don't have that that get out that most of us have. And this hits the Premier League's desk on the same day as Rick Parry's comments, more from a financial view than a safety view yesterday in terms of the Premier League working with the EFL. What is very clear now is that the whole footballing world are all looking at the Premier League now, waiting for some leadership, waiting for that cascade effect to follow on from them. They really are the leader in this, and it really, really is crunch time now for the big decisions. So yes, this was reported last night. So it's around 100 questions, although 100 sounds like a more pithy title. And I have to say, this is about the return to training. So questions from the Premier League doctors just about the return to training, not matches. I'm trying to get my head around whether training is actually less safe than matches. In terms of the number of people and the contact, it probably is. There's probably more people on the training ground than actually are forced together at a match. The only people really that are forced together at a match are the players on the pitch. They cannot social distance, obviously. Whereas in training, you've got tons and tons of staff, and well, we'll talk about the treatment angle on it as well, because we're into the realms of ridiculousness. If a masseur has to social distance from a player, that's not going to work in with my limited sort of sports biology knowledge here. The email is split into 10 areas, and it's looking at unaddressed topics, all in respects of safety. The Project Restart, as it's been called, is aiming at training in groups, recommencing on May the 18th, with the season supposedly restarting on June the 12th. And the questions that came up, and I mean, people will roll their eyes at some of these, but who's responsible for risk policy? So it immediately goes legal, and it immediately goes money. Whose fault is it if something goes wrong? Who's going to be left holding the baby, etc.? Should we consider heightened susceptibility for BAME players? So BAME is black and minority ethnic players. Not sure about this one. I'm not sure we know enough about the disease to say that it adversely affects BAME people. And if someone can show me a report to say that it does, I'll happily read it. I'm not sure we know in that greater detail, but if it does, then that's obviously something that would need to be looked at, bearing in mind the vast, I mean, we say it's got the word minority in that, but I'd like to see the numbers. Surely the majority of Premier League players and elite footballers possibly fit that category of black and minority ethnic. So I'd be interested to see the literature and the science on that, even though we know that it's changing every day. Remember, I don't want us to get political, successful footballers now are in a very different socio-economic background than your average black and minority ethnic person living on the breadline, let's just say. So whether we can conflate the two numbers again, I don't want this to get. I never want this channel to get into matters of race or ethnicity or politics or gender and all those horrible things that people row about. So I'm just reporting what they're saying here. Liability, again, it's money, isn't it? This is presumably in terms of who's responsible. How can we approve the guidelines that carry risk of death? That's a fair comment. I know there's risk of death in lots and lots of jobs. I'm sure people who work on an oil rig or on a building site or in a factory with heavy machinery would work under guidelines that include risk of death. So, hands up there. But again, if it's an invisible virus, I guess that's very different than your normal health and safety measure. The idea of hands-on treatment following a long rest, I mean, that's a very, very good point that they make, that you would imagine players from a pre-season point of view are eased in, and there is lots of massage and lots of stretching and treatments on building players up. And is that safe? Is there going to be a whole lot of injuries on this kind of relaxed sort of training type thing that would have to be done under social distancing? The contact pool of players and staff hasn't been addressed. I don't want to start off on my schools rant when we talk about contact pools, but yes, that's a fair point. You can test the players at the door of the training ground, but they're going to leave the training ground every day, and then where do they go? Do we expect them to quarantine themselves? And then again, the thing of, are they connecting with someone asymptomatic and then going home to a pregnant wife? Or some wealthy football players will have moved grandparents and people in by way of looking after them with their success and their extra money. So I'm sure there are at-risk people, even a child with asthma or a wife or whoever's living in the football players' houses. It's very, very plausible that there are at-risk people, certainly in the contact pool, and people carrying the virus in the contact pool as well. Can the virus be transmitted by sweat? I would have thought we would have had more research on it by that, but yeah, you would assume that droplets of sweat could transfer it, although surely that goes way back to the testing, and if someone's carrying the virus and it can be transferred by sweat, I thought this whole thing was predicated on that they would be tested, and well, again, we go into the asymptomatic angle, don't we? But we assume the tests pick that up. So interesting. Goalie gloves. I'm sure anyone who's played football at any standard has seen very smelly, old, horrible, germ-filled pairs of goalkeeping gloves. Do they carry it? Again, I suppose it goes back to testing and the COD scientific theory that, as I understand, that if you have 22 people, none of whom have got the virus, none of them can spread the virus to each other. So again, testing, trace, testing, etc. But how many times are these players going to need to be tested, for goodness sake? Will increased activity result in lower immunity? This is the argument that coming back and doing the pre-season and playing 2 games a week will actually reduce immunity because the body's working so hard. Again, scientists and doctors would know more about that than me, but that's something they've asked to be addressed. What is the risk of sudden death? My goodness, we're talking about heart stuff, and we were talking earlier in the video about black and minority ethnic. If you remember, there has been cases of, and I don't want to get this wrong, so I'll speculate. I'm citing Mark Vivian Foe and some other African footballers who died suddenly on the pitch, super fit men, of heart problems. So whether there's an immunity link with, and I'm sure there was a susceptibility for African sort of players with that genealogy. So again, I'm tiptoeing around this. I don't know the facts, but certainly if you do some reading on the Mark Vivian Foe, that case, and there were other cases. So again, does that all link in there? Mental health, well, mental health at the moment, everybody in the world, in the country, is having their mental health tested. Obviously, if footballers feel they're going back into riskier situations than others, then yes, that will have an adverse effect on their mental health. But at this point, I think we want to look at the mental health of everybody who's kept working, of all the people in Waitrose who are surrounding themselves every day and in Tesco's, and again, I don't want to go off on a schools rant, but the people who are going to be expected to go back into schools. So yeah, I don't think that's a footballing issue. I think that's an everybody issue at the moment. The email ends: rumours aplenty that some clubs are ignoring agreements amongst the doctors group without repercussions. It seems odd that risk taking for performance advantage in the current circumstances should be viewed within some clubs as good practice. That sounds like a bit of a dig. How would you break the rules and breach the rules to gain performance advantage? I guess you'd relax the social distancing and allow full training when that's not supposed to be happening. Could you lie about tests? If your key player tests positive, you don't quarantine. I don't know how you would break the rules. And they finish by asking if rule breakers will be punished and what power they have in this area. Now, the Premier League apparently has welcomed all of this feedback and asked for it, and they're going to look at it. There's a certain amount of, again, I'm not a doctor, but just can they answer all these questions? Well, no, they can't. Nobody can answer all these questions. If it's the doctors asking the questions, then we're a little bit screwed from that standpoint anyway, aren't we? Because they're normally the ones we expect to come with the answers, which shows how little we do know about the virus. I think we're at a point in the debate now where we need to move it on to the next stage, really, because there's obviously a strong argument that no football should take place, but if you roll that argument out to the rest of the world and other employments and things of that nature, then frankly you could argue most jobs, if not all jobs, unless you're an electrician kitting out houses and you're going to leave your house, you're going to be on your own all day and you're not going to go within 2 meters of anybody or be put at risk, then which jobs don't carry risk? Obviously we can minimise the risk, and again, as people are very keen to point out in the comments on my videos, you can't social distance in a football match. You literally can't. It's part of a sport that you go within 2 meters of each other. It's even I guess golf. You can keep within 2 meters in golf. In tennis, you can't, can you? You come to the net together. So we understand that it can only take place on the assumption that everybody's been tested and that you can then lower those social distancing protocols because you know that no one's carrying the virus. I know someone will comment, what happens when one person gets the virus then? Yeah, fair question. I'm guessing they're hoping that there's a long enough run through this training that they can isolate things and have that guaranteed by the time we restart. Certainly a lot of pressure on footballers isolating them, isn't it? My overarching point though was we're at a point now where if nothing restarts, and I had a good conversation about this on a podcast the other day, and there is an argument that, okay, the most cautious approach is everyone stays in lockdown until there's a vaccine. Right, okay, so there's no vaccine for another 6 months, another 12 months, or whatever that figure that nobody knows is going to be. Then there's a point where we cross over and the economic and socio-economic damage of nobody working then starts to cause more deaths than the actual virus does. So when I'm talking about moving the debate on, it's no longer sensible, I think, to just say, nobody should do anything. I think what I'd like to hear is if people do think that no, football shouldn't start until it's safe. Fine, that's a sensible enough argument. What I'd then like to hear is, well, what does restart? I mean, I've mentioned the example of the electrician working on his own. I guess there's vital places where they do work on the testing and the cleanliness, and then there's the argument, if you can do that in a dental surgery, why can't you do it in a football pitch? Again, people will argue, why is football more important? And yes, that's probably a fair argument, but I think what I'm saying is, if you come to this debate from the position of no, don't start until it's safe, let me know how you're going to restart the country then, because that's not me having a dig. I don't know the answers. I'm just interested. I think that's the next phase of the debate now. I don't think it's enough to just say no, they shouldn't start until it's safe. Obviously, we want everyone to be safe, and I don't want to go off on my education rant, because I work in a school and my missus works in a school and she has asthma, so she's at risk, and we see reports unsubstantiated that schools are going to go back phased on June the 1st. My argument would be, if you're safe to go into a school where, as in football, social distancing is impossible, however they phase it. I don't know if you're going to have a school and you're just going to let 5 people in or something, because that's the only way you'd be able to keep everybody 2 meters apart. Then I think you start to put the context together of, if it's safe for an adult to go into a school with 400, wouldn't be 400, say 100 pupils just let in, and a contact pool which is 1,000 times bigger than footballers training, then if that's safe on June the 1st, then show me your context is what I'm saying now. Then I think it's safe for footballers to be playing on June the 12th. I'm saying if one happens, then how can you argue against the other? So I think we now need to broaden this and say, if we're not doing this, what are we doing? Because everything is going to collapse if nothing opens. And if we're waiting for the vaccine when things are truly safe, don't go back until it's safe, then we're going to be waiting a long time. So anyway, gone off on a bit of a ramble there about the wider debate, but it's starting to come into it now. The key thing here is that the Premier League are the ones, they're leading this. Rick Parry's wanting to hear from the Premier League, the doctors now wanting to hear from the Premier League, the FA, the PFA, everyone wants to hear from the Premier League. What are they going to do? And again, let's get the debate going. It doesn't have to be snarly or unkind, but my question is, if your stance is yes, you think it's doable and they can answer most of these things, then fine, cool, let me know that. If your stance is no, don't go back until it's 100% safe, then I think we need to move the debate on and say, okay, football's not going back. What is going back? How are we judging other industries against this, where social distancing would appear to be impossible? Let me know what you think in the comments. I don't want the channel to get overly political, but it feels like we're now into that zone. If football doesn't reopen, it seems to be becoming more and more of a social and political issue rather than a football issue, as to where that now fits in the wider world of things coming back and people's safety and your average Joe Blogg's safety compared to your Premier League and EFL footballers' safety. Anyway, I've gone round and round and round, so please do help me out in the comments. If you think anything I've said is dumb or stupid, then raise it in the comments, but please be nice. I'm spitballing as we go. I don't have any more of a clue, and frankly, if a doctor is asking 100 questions, then how the hell should a musician and part-time football vlogger like me have any of the answers? Would be my comeback. So let's try and have a nice, sensible, kind debate in the comments and try and put forth some good ideas. And I think my answer would be is whenever I've worked on any committee things in my life, it's always been, okay, you're telling me that we can't do this. What is your solution? What happens going forward? And for outside of football, because now that's becoming an issue with the context of other people being expected to go back to work in maybe equally or far higher risk environments than the football players would be expected. Let me know what you think of the comments. I'm going to finally shut up. We're coming up 20 minutes, it says on the clock up there. So Twitter @Benjamin Bloom, and get the comments going, get the debate going, and I'll see you on the next video.